Part of what we do when we come together is we need to tell the story of what God is doing in our lives and what He has done. That's part of the reason why Dave Ramsey has people call in and scream, "I'm debt-free." Because somebody is crossing the finish line and they're paying off $10,000, $50,000, $100,000 worth of debt, and they are in moments of victory, and we celebrate with them. But while somebody else is celebrating, somebody else is on step one, and they don't think that they'll ever get to the finish line. And so when we testify, when we talk about what God has done in our lives and is doing in our lives, we give somebody else the fuel to take that next step. So this morning, I've asked 3 of our church family to share what God has done in their lives this last year, and I'm going to ask Miss Brenda if she would come up. And you know these folks. If you don't know these folks, you're about to know them a little bit better. And if we had the time this morning, every single one of you could tell a story of God's work in their life, what God has done in them. I want you to listen this morning. Hey, good morning.
Hey.
How's it going?
Nervous.
Yeah. You'll be fine. And I want you to hear what God has done and be encouraged by what God has done and is doing and can do in your life. Would you do that this morning? Listen today actively for what God can do and is doing. This is Brenda Russell. Hold that.
Okay. I'm going to read what, when Pastor asked me, I prayed that the Lord would give me words that could be an encouragement to someone here. But I love the song, "This Is My Story, This Is My Song." And this is part of the last 27 years. Sorry. In June of 1990, when my marriage of almost 24 years ended in divorce, I felt my self-worth was at its lowest point that it could ever be. I've been a Christian since I was about 10, so as you can tell, that's been a few years. And divorce was never part of my remotest thoughts. It was not what Christians do. But sometimes even Christians have issues in their lives that are out of their control. So I guess that's what the Bible means, why we are a free moral agent. Was I ever surprised when I went to a camp meeting in June of 1992 and Ray introduced himself to me? Unbeknownst to me, my friend from Memphis had told him he needed to meet me. His wife had recently passed away, and he wasn't really looking to meet anybody, so he was such a nice guy, he decided that he's going to camp meeting, he might as well do the nice thing and meet me. Of course, she didn't tell me what was up because she knew if she had, I would not have shown up. After I arrived, he came up to me and said, "My name is Ray Russell." And I always say to him, what I thought when he said that was, "Ain't your mama proud?" But I didn't say that out loud. I didn't really think that, but that's what I always told him. Then, when we went over to the service, he sat down beside me, and I thought, well, who's this man sitting next to me? Long story short, Ray and I spent almost 27 years together. We met in June and married in September. At our age, we didn't believe in long engagements. And Brother Howson tried to talk us out of it, I think, marrying so soon, but we made it. Thinking about God's faithfulness and meeting my needs before and after we married, I can only say that God has always been faithful. He put me in a position to get a job with the government where now I have a retirement. He allowed me to meet a man whose goal in life was to make me happy. And he told me so on many occasions. He would tell me that besides getting married, the second best thing that ever happened to him was when he met and married me. Can you see why tears streamed down my face? When I remember him sitting next to me at church. That spot's empty now, but I know it's not the end. We knew Ray's endurance was waning, but never thought the end of his days was so near. After a routine blood test, we were told that his kidneys and heart were shutting down. He was immediately put on hospice. Excuse me. On that Friday. At first, he seemed his old self and was when he was sitting, but when he began to move around, you could tell that he was not. When the friends from church would come to visit, I could look on their face and they would say, "Well, Ray looks like he always did." But of course, they couldn't tell the struggles he was having. He enjoyed about a week with his family who were in from Texas and Mississippi. The following Sunday, he began to go down. He wasn't eating, and by Tuesday evening, we had to call the hospice nurse to assist with pain. After he was able to settle down, I laid on the couch so I could be near him. At about 3 Wednesday morning, I recognized he was uncomfortable. So I gave him his meds and decided it might be my last day with him. I turned on the lights in the den where we were, and I made some coffee and put on the Statler Brothers. They have a Christian CD. And I held his hand. How can I say thank you to a God who allowed me to spend the last 3 hours with the love of my life? At 6, he took a breath, and he took one more, and then he passed on to his reward in heaven. When he was placed under hospice care, I began to pray that God would not let him linger and suffer. From start to finish, he was on hospice about 13 days. Up until that last day, he was alert and he knew me. God answered that prayer. This grief walk is different for everyone, and there's no one size fits all. Because of God and faithful friends and family, I don't walk it alone. I find comfort in the scripture in 1 Thessalonians 4:13 and 14, that I don't have to grieve as the world grieves with no hope, because I believe that Jesus died and rose again and is coming back with Ray to collect me, and we will all be with the Lord forever. Another blessing from God. One afternoon, Christy came to me and said, "Mom, I know you can do anything you want to, but if you aren't happy alone, you don't have to push yourself and just to be here by yourself. That we have a downstairs that you can come and live in." After prayer and thinking about it, I accepted the kind offer from her and Brad. And I did tell Brad before I moved, before they start shoveling the dirt, you better rethink this thing. Having your mother-in-law downstairs may not be what you think it is. But he said that was fine. Within a few weeks of getting things together to start the remodel, my great-nephew called and said one of the buddies wanted to look at my house. Now, the sequence of events that I had planned was get the place ready where I'm going to, move into the place where I'm going to, then sell the house. Well, the young man liked the house and decided he wanted to buy it. So after I took a few deep breaths, we settled on a closing date of December the 13th. Another prayer answered by God. My house is sold. As you know, most contractors give you a deadline, but they exceed it. Thank the Lord we're on schedule. I actually moved my stuff in on Friday, and we were worn out, but that was another answer to prayer. One of my favorite hymns, and my best friend Patsy reminded me of this. I'd like to read a couple of. Made whatever betide, beneath his wings of love abide, through days of toil, heart does fail, when danger's fears sure pass assail, all you may need he will provide, nothing you ask will be denied. No matter what may be the test, lean weary one upon his breast, God will take care of you. Through every day, or all the way, he will take care of you. God will take care of you. In all these steps, I saw how God was orchestrating my days. Jeremiah 29:11, as we all know, says, "For I know the plans I have for you, declares the Lord, plans to prosper you and not to harm you, plans to give you hope and a future." Yes, my life with Ray on this earth is over, and I've shed many tears because I miss him so. But God still has a plan for my life, and he promises to take care of me.
Wanted to ask Bill and Beth Spillers if they would come and share part of the journey they've been on over these last few months. If you know them, and if you have met Bill, you know that perhaps not many people are looking forward to having a brand new body someday, as folks who have been particularly broken in their physical body. And man, do they have a story. So I wanted them to share part of that with you this morning. So there you go. Thank you.
Good morning. Well, I was asked to tell you what God has done in our lives in the last year. And I only have 8 minutes, so I'm going to talk real fast. About a year ago, we were on a physical and a spiritual high. We had just come off of a Bible distribution in Nashville where we were part of a team that was privileged to hand out about 50,000 testaments in Nashville. And we had come from the doctors and had been given an all clear from his last surgery, major back surgery, and he was doing great. In February, we went on another Bible distribution in Pigeon Forge where we were on a team where we were allowed to hand out around 40,000 Bibles. So things were looking pretty good. In April, we were getting ready to go on another trip when Billy fell. And we had an appointment with an orthopedic surgeon. So we kept that appointment, and the doctor said, well, I don't see anything broken. Your spine looks good. The rod looks good. So Billy thought, well, okay. The doctor said, you're going to be sore for probably 10 to 12 days. And he thought, I can be sore on a trip, or I can be sore at home. And the doctor told him, but your hip does look like it needs to be replaced, and you can choose when you want to do that. We go on the trip. Billy stayed in bed for that 12 days. Then for 2 days after that, he walked around, and then he told me, I can't take it anymore. I'm like, okay, well, you have an appointment with the neurosurgeon. We go to the neurosurgeon. He says, the rod's broke. Oh, by the way, your back is also broke. He had surgery in June. Now, God is good because guess what? Billy did not need any rehab of any kind. But Satan said, I don't like this. We are going to knock you down. Literally, Billy fell and broke his neck. Not once, but twice. And the second time was in the hospital. That takes us to July. Now, he had to spend some time in rehab, inpatient and outpatient. While he was in outpatient rehab, he had several falls. And during one of those falls, he said, this is really painful. And I said, okay, we're going to go to an orthosurgeon and we'll get that looked at. The surgeon said, your hip is broke. And it's an old break. That means we can't repair it. Looks like it probably broke from that April fall. So now he has a broken hip and another hip that needs to be repaired. That means the end of rehab. Well, now it is time to have the neck and the back looked at to see how recovery is going. Remember, he is still in the neck brace. We go back to the surgeon, neurosurgeon, and he says, you can take the brace off. Hallelujah, Billy is so relieved. And oh, by the way, you get the prize for the quickest break after surgery. He has now broken the rod again. And we are looking at another surgery January 3rd. That takes us up to October. Now, Billy is not going to let this put him down, hold him back in any way. So we went on another Bible distribution at Austin P, where we were part of a team where we were privileged to hand out close to 1,000 Bibles here locally. That takes us up to right now, and I'm going to let Billy speak.
My grace is sufficient for thee, for my strength is made perfect in weakness. Once I heard this, I was glad to accept my circumstances. I quit focusing on the injuries and appreciating the gift that I was given. Strange gift. But it became a case of Christ's strength moving in me. Now, quite often, my limitations I take in stride, and I take with good cheer. But these same limitations quite often cut me down to size. Accidents, oppositions, and bad breaks. And in my case, the resulting operations. But I just let Christ take over. And so the weaker I get, the stronger I became. When pain becomes unbearable, I am not driven to despair, but instead am driven to my knees. This is based on the message, 2 Corinthians 12, 9 and 10.
We are truly blessed. We are blessed by this church. We have a great Sunday school class that encourages each other. We have a wonderful pastor. I do not know if this church realizes what a wonderful pastor it has. When Billy would be in the hospital, he would text us, he'd call, he'd stop by every day. And with Billy, that's a lot of days. I would be there at the hospital day after day to the point that I would be making myself sick. I took a day off, and that day off was the day that they decided to transfer him to a different hospital. And a church family member transferred him for me. God has really blessed us. When Billy would have these operations, or these hospital visits, I would see them as, okay, God, what divine appointment do you have for us? Who are we supposed to meet with? So I always thought that that's what was going on. But this past year, God has taught me something new. I had the privilege of leading the Tuesday morning Bible study, and we studied James. And in James 5, I want to read from the Amplified. He taught me that it's not the difficult times that you go through, because we all have difficult times, and we say, why me? But it's how you go through them. So in the Amplified, James 5:11, you know we call those blessed, happy, spiritually prosperous, favored by God, who were steadfast and endured difficult circumstances. You heard of the patient endurance of Job, and you have seen the Lord's outcome, how he richly blessed Job. The Lord is full of compassion and is merciful.
The last person I wanted you to hear from this morning was Daryl Taylor, and I'll ask Daryl to come. Daryl was career military, got out, and thought, well, what is the next natural step? I know, middle school teacher. And my favorite quote from Daryl, and Dana has used this as a fellow middle school teacher, Dana's used this repeatedly, that there are many days that he would prefer to be downrange than go back into that middle school. And he tells a great story about the transition that he went through in the last couple of years. So thanks, brother. I appreciate it. Yeah.
All right. Can y'all hear me?
No.
No?
Use the microphone.
All right. Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
All right, so I stand before kids every day, so this is really, but you aren't kids. Y'all really aren't kids. Just kidding. So Rich asked me to share my story of God's goodness and his faithfulness, specifically how God was with me in my transition from being in the military to being a middle school teacher. However, before you can really understand that transition, what God was doing, I need to tell you a few other things. I need to tell you the following so you can understand the mindset I had developed and had come to accept and adopt. It's also that same mindset that God would chip away at. In the Bible, we call this chipping away process pruning. However, in life, the tools that God uses for this pruning are called pain and grief, stress, and pressure. All right. So I grew up in a house where I was taught to respect my elders. We were taught to say yes sir, no sir, yes ma'am, no ma'am to any adult. If adults were talking, you didn't interrupt. For that matter, you didn't actually join the conversations unless you were asked a question. You didn't ask questions, you didn't talk. My stepdad was not up for a debate, whether you wanted to do something or not, nor did he care if it interfered with what you were currently doing. Once you accepted that way of thinking, life was easier. 1995, I went to Special Forces selection. What was interesting about SF was they would put the instructions on the board, and you had to meet the requirements that were written on the board. They would tell you where to be, when to be, what you had to wear, and how much weight you had to have in your rucksack, and what had to be in the rucksack. Easy enough. No one held your hand or made you do the work. If you didn't show up or have what was written on the board, it was really no big deal. And I mean that. You either met the standard or you left. It was actually your choice. I spent the next 2 years training in small unit tactics, land navigation, medicine, language. Again, no one was yelling at you, trying to motivate you. There had to be self-motivation. You either did the work or you didn't. I graduated with a Green Beret along with a couple of hundred others. Over the next 18 years in SF, I worked with an amazing group of guys and experienced quite a bit. So I trained a little in different martial arts. I jumped approximately 300 times out of various rotary and fixed-wing aircraft. I've jumped into blacked-out DZs, experienced parachute malfunctions. I've jumped in the icy cold and the blistering heat. I've landed in trees, lakes, deserts, and roads. I've shot tens of thousands of rounds with over 20 different types of weapon systems, long guns, short guns, machine guns, anti-tank guns, mortars. I've slept outside on the ground when the temperatures were single digits, when they were triple digits, when it was pouring rain, with limited water, with too many mosquitoes and too little food. I've gone days with little or no sleep to accomplish training missions. I've deployed around 15 times overseas, with most of those deployments spent in the Middle East. I've been to 18 countries. I've seen the Great Pyramids of Giza, the Sphinx, the Nile River, Stonehenge, Trafalgar Square, Buckingham Palace, the White House, Disney. Houses of Parliament, Big Ben, even swam with dolphins in the Red Sea. I have 8 combat deployments with 5th Group. I was part of both invasions into Afghanistan and Iraq. I was in Grenada in '83 for all you older people. Kosovo in '99, Afghanistan and Iraq, 2001 and 3. I've been in numerous bad situations. I've seen people hung, beheaded, burned, shot, and blown up. I've experienced the loss of friends, former students, and allies in the wars. I've taught foreign military soldiers to shoot. I've taught them medicine, planning, and small unit tactics. I've worked with the CIA, the FBI, and other government agencies. I've met ambassadors, congressmen, senators, and presidents of small countries. I've experienced a lot in that short amount of time. Then I retired. I left behind my uniform and beret, took with me the self-confidence and mindset that had been honed through training, combat, and other life experiences. But as you know, and I know, life doesn't happen in a vacuum. While all these things were going on, there were other things that were taking place. Life doesn't stop because you're deployed. Life doesn't stop because you're stressed. There's still bills to pay, chores to do, meals to prepare, a marriage to cultivate, a wife to support, grandkids to spend time with and love. We had grown kids who needed help, who were hurting, who would come to the house. I didn't expect that one. Who would come to the house simply to feel the environment, to be able to forget their own problems, if only for a while. Give me just a second. All right, they needed respite from their own lives, from their own decisions, and our house was the place where they would return. They would be given a bed, they would be fed, they would be loved, they would be given advice, and have their kids fed, bathed, and changed. And for a moment in time, they were able to feel taken care of. They were able to forget. Our lives were full. The calendar was full. And to top it all off, God was still requiring of me to love, to be patient, to be kind, to be gentle, to be good, to exhibit peace, to exhibit joy, to exercise self-control with all of this going on. Now, you have a dim picture of who I was and what was going on. Now I can tell you about God's faithfulness and his goodness during this transition. After retirement, I decided I was going to go into teaching. I actually felt a calling to do this. Teach kids, I was a Green Beret. I've been shot out. How hard could it be, right? And when I said that to teachers, they were like, oh, bless your heart. Bless your heart. How hard it could be? Well, I'd soon find out. My first year teaching could be summed up by saying it was the closest thing I've done where I was on the verge of calling it quits. And that's the truth. Didn't quit at anything, but that was the closest I've come. It's where I constantly question whether I really understood God's leading. Conversations between me and God went something like this. God, are you sure I'm supposed to be doing this? Did I hear you correctly? Nothing seems to be working out. The kids were not raised with the same set of rules concerning adults and respect that I was raised with. Either that or they chose to ignore it. Middle school kids do not care what you've done, where you've been, or what you've accomplished. They only care about how they feel at the moment. The team that I was with was not functioning as a well-oiled machine. On the contrary, it was very dysfunctional, and the stress was constant. The conversations I was having with God about his leading was not a one-time conversation. The intensity and the frequency of the conversations increased as the year progressed. By April, with only 1 month left of school, I was running on fumes. I had nothing else left. My internal fuel gauge was pointing at E, and that didn't stand for enough. But this was not the first time that it had been on E. Just like we would take in our kids, feed them, let them sleep, and take care of their kids while at the house, God did the same with me during that time. He would give me just enough to keep me going for the moment. However, by April, I was again at my wit's end. The difference I wanted to make working with kids was nowhere to be seen. The obligations put on me were not decreasing. God never removed previous responsibilities from my plate. I cried out only to hear silence. Silence. I was stressed, I was tense, I was physically fatigued. I felt like I had a 5-pound board and was asked to put it across a 10-foot ditch. I had reached what I felt was a breaking point. It was April 16th, 2019. I was at a school when I finally snapped. Now, I didn't snap on the kids. What'd you do? It wasn't one thing that broke me, it was everything. It was everything added together. I don't remember the exact conversation I had with God, but I do remember saying something along the lines, after all I've done, after all I've been through, after everything I've done in my life, after everything I've done for them, I have not made one iota of a difference with these kids whatsoever. They're still rude, self-centered, lazy, and apathetic. Why are you dealing with me, Lord? Why are you not dealing with them? How can you continually ask me to be patient, to be kind, to be gentle, to be good? Have you seen these kids? Have you seen these kids, Lord? I must have misunderstood your leading. I cannot do this, Father. Whenever I talk like that to the Lord, there was always silence on his end. Always silence. However, today would be different. Out of nowhere, I received a text from a guy with whom I served in the military. I'd run into him months earlier while at Manna. Today, he sent me a text saying I was in his prayers. Out of nowhere, he sent me a text. Hey, you're in my prayers. I want to send you something. And this is what he sent. So then, It's amazing how when you go through something, all of a sudden the emotion that you felt at the time it comes back. So then faith comes by hearing, and hearing by the word of God. That did something for me alone. But then he said something else. He says, I have one other thing. So then neither he who plants is anything, nor he who waters, but God who gives the increase. When I read those words, I was humbled. I realized I had built part of my life, crazy, the lessons that you learn. I realized that I had built my life on shifting sand, part of my life on shifting sand, and the day was revealing it. The tension eased, the stress dissipated. The silence was no more. It took me some time to come out of a fog, but as I did, there were life lessons I was reminded of, and this is what I'm thankful for. Rich said this last week, God never leaves us or forsakes us. His goodness and faithfulness that we're talking about are tied to, understand this, are tied to making us like Christ. You need other Christians in your life. I cannot stress that enough. God has prepared you previously for what you're facing currently. Ordeals have a knack of revealing what you believe about God and his ways. If what you believe is on solid ground, you will stand. If what you believe is on sinking sand, it will be washed away, and it needs to be. You rarely understand what God is trying to show you while you're in the middle of the ordeal. It's only afterwards that God's purpose becomes clearer. It would take time, but I would come to the conclusion his silence wasn't from a lack of compassion. On the contrary, it was out of compassion he remained silent. It was a silence of resolve. Much like a father with a son who has some type of internal disease that must be cut out, the fear the son has about the anesthesia or getting cut by the scalpel does not stop the father from allowing the surgeon to cut it out. It is not that the father is not sympathetic to the fears of the son, but he knows the surgery is necessary for the health of his son. He has set his heart to do what is necessary to save the life of the son. His resolve is unshaken. It would be a poor father indeed who gave in to the fears of a child under such circumstances. I'm grateful for what I went through. It was not fun. It didn't feel good, but it was good. But that's what I'm grateful for.